And this is a phenomenon that I've noticed for years now. You have these pro-Israel types or you have these Zionist types who come along and they say, "Oh, this is great. We're seeing Westerners finally just having enough with all this woke nonsense, and look at them now. They're becoming nationalists. This is great." You guys are fools. They will go against black people and they will go against the Jews because anti-Semitism, alongside just plain old racism, is reviving. And if you're Jewish and you think that you're going to be immune, you're an idiot because you don't even look at the reality of your own history. And now we got white folks talking about how much they're critical of Israel. And you're seeing more and more of them, celebrities, some of them. Theo Vaughn being one of them, Tucker Carlson being another. There is a shift happening, not just in any demographic in the United States, but in the largest demographic in the United States, and that is the white demographic. And I've said this numerous times, this is the biggest fear that Israel has, is white people not liking Israel. Because that would spell the end for Israel's Western support. When Trump looks at the Gulf Arabs, he sees deals, he sees an openness and an enthusiasm to work with the Americans. But when he sees the Israelis, Donald Trump sees headaches. Israel must recognize that Trump in 2025 is a different political creature. And the Republican Party is no longer what it once was. So my guess is that the war is going to continue on until Israel takes enough territory so that it'll say, we have enough territory to build settlements. And then it'll pursue a ceasefire. And part of the ceasefire deal will be that Israel will be allowed to control at least a chunk of Gaza. Probably half of Gaza. Here is something very interesting that I saw before starting this stream. And I'm wondering if you guys also saw the same video. Theo Vaughn, very, very popular podcaster. He did a video recently, and the title of the video was something like, "What have we done?" or something like that. What in the hell are we doing? And you can see on the thumbnail that the video is about Gaza. And the thumbnail is Theo Vaughn next to a photo of a Palestinian woman with her child. And obviously they're in the middle of a completely destroyed city. And there's all this rubble around them and it looks like hell. And Theo Vaughn is saying, "I just wanted to say this about Gaza. I'm heartbroken about what Israel has been doing in Gaza, and I'm heartbroken about the fact that the United States has given the green light to all of this destruction and chaos and bloodshed." And then you read the comments. I mean, the video has, I want to say, hundreds of thousands of views already. And then you read the comments, and all these comments, there's tons of comments because Theo Vaughn is very popular. All these comments are just critical of Israel, and they're agreeing with Theo Vaughn. Now, Theo Vaughn, I don't have to tell this to you guys. Theo Vaughn is not of a minority ethnicity. All right, I mean, he's ethnically Polish, so maybe in that regard, he's a minority. But in the United States, he's not considered as a member of a minority group. He's not black, he's not Hispanic, he's not Palestinian, he's not Middle Eastern. He's a white guy. And not only is he a white guy, but he's a comedian, a celebrity comedian, who has this persona of Larry the Cable Guy. You know, that Larry the Cable Guy personality. "Oh, I'm just a good old boy from Louisiana. I'm just really funny. Ha ha." He has that's his character, right? That's his shtick. And I'm not saying it's fake, but that's why people like him. That's the appeal that he has. So for that guy, so if we see Kanye West bashing Israel or Candace Owens, we'll say, okay, they're African Americans. African Americans have always tended to be more critical of Israel than white Americans have. This is just a fact. But to see a white boy bashing Israel, to see Tucker Carlson criticizing Israel, that is a whole different story. And it's like a canary in the coal mine situation. When you start to see African Americans or Middle Eastern Americans bashing Israel is no big deal. Because for one thing, they're minorities. So they're not the biggest part of the electorate in the United States. And secondly, African Americans have always been, they've always tended to be more critical of Israel. So it's really nothing new to see Candace Owens or Kanye West. It's not surprising to see those two attacking Israel, but to see Theo Vaughn or Tucker Carlson attacking Israel, it's a canary in the coal mine situation, because that is a reflection of a growing either animosity or a growing dislike amongst whites toward Israel. And because whites are the majority in the United States, because they are the most powerful voting demographic in the United States, and because they dominate the United States, just given the fact that they're the majority, it's pretty serious for Israel. If black people hate Israel, no big deal. If white people hate Israel, it's a serious damn problem, because they're the majority. They dominate the U.S. And what's Israel's biggest ally? We all know what Israel's biggest ally. We all know which is Israel's biggest ally. It's the United States. So if Israel loses that white demographic, it's over. It is over. Same thing goes with Europe. The second biggest ally to Israel is the European Union. Which demographic dominates the EU? White Europeans. They dominate the EU. And if those people hate Israel enough to the point that they start voting for parties that hate Israel, or even just hate Jews, like we're talking, if they start voting for parties that are basically repackaged Nazi parties, Israel's in big trouble. Oh, that's right. It's already been happening in Germany with the AfD. And so if Israel loses the white man, if Israel loses Japheth, Israel's screwed. Because the white demographic dominates the EU and the United States. And if they all start hating Israel, that's going to be reflected in the politics of those two major blocks of power, the EU and the United States. And the policies will violently shift towards Israel's not favor, but Israel's disfavor. They will shift towards either a more indifferent policy when it comes to Israel, or really to an antagonistic policy when it comes to Israel. Either way, Israel's screwed. So if I see Kanye, I'm like, okay, fine, whatever, right? I mean, it's bad. But when you start seeing white folks attacking Israel, this is what keeps Israel up at night. It's not Arabs, it's not Palestinians, it's the white world giving the middle finger to Israel. That is what Israel is terrified of more than anything in this world, because that would mean Israel losing its two biggest allies. It's just, things are looking very ugly for Israel. I'm just going to say it. Things are looking very ugly. Revolt of the WASP middle management class. The thing is that if white people start saying, we hate Israel, that will become reflected in how they vote. And you're going to start seeing more and more Americans talking about how they're not going to vote for a politician if they're funded by AIPAC. And then you're going to start seeing politicians saying things like, I ain't funded by AIPAC. I'm here for the American people. My campaign is completely funded by small donations from average, hardworking Americans like yourself. Not illegals and not Jews. You're going to start seeing stuff like that. Oh yeah, anti-Semitism is coming back. Racism is here. I mean, we've been seeing this in the whole whatever GoFundMe I forget, it's not GoFundMe, but it's like a GoFundMe. You go fund, you fund go or something. The whole GoFundMe battle. You got a bunch of black people giving money to Carmelo, what's his name? Carmelo Jackson or whatever his name is. Yeah, Carmelo Anthony. Yeah, and they're like, well, we gonna fund him. We gonna fund this man. We gonna fund him. Who. And then you have these schmucks, these evil, insidious individuals on Twitter saying things like, well, really, technically, there's nothing wrong with the Carmelo Anthony fund because, I mean, technically, he's innocent until proven guilty, so he's an innocent man. He's an innocent man. And then all the people giving money to the fund, they're saying, yeah, that makes sense. That's a good point. He may make sense. And they start pouring money, hundreds of thousands of dollars for this Carmelo guy, So then some woman calls says the N-word, and she gives the middle finger to some Somalian guy who's filming her in a playground somewhere. And it turns out that this Somalian dude has been charged with rape, I think. And she looks at the camera and she gives the middle finger and she says the N-word with the hard R. And then what happens? Scores of people online start giving her money to help her out. And at first she said, okay, I want, she was asking for tens of thousands of dollars, something like that, 12,000, I forgot. She asked for a certain amount of money. So she got over $100,000 easily. And then she said, okay, I need this much money. So now she's gotten hundreds of thousands. Last I checked, maybe it's more now. And then she started asking for $1 million, just a cool $1 million. Give me $1 million. So this woman wants $1 million because she got famous. She went viral for saying the N-word with a hard R. I mean, don't tell me racism ain't here. It's back, guys. And the only reason why people have been funding Carmelo Anthony is because he's black. That's it. That is the reason. Oh, he a black man. If Carmelo Anthony was a white dude, they wouldn't give a shit. But they're giving money because he black. He African American. Oh, he like us. He innocent. Bullshit. It's bullshit. It's race. That's all it is. It's racism is returning. Here's the thing that no one brings up. This has happened in U.S. history before. Go look up the Philadelphia riot. All right? Philadelphia riot that happened in the 1800s. I want to say it happened in the 1850s. You can look into this. It was basically a bunch of white dudes went into a black neighborhood or a black enclave in Philadelphia, and they just sacked the whole place and killed a bunch of people. And do you know what happened that got these people to justify violence and destruction? This happened in the 1800s. I know this for a fact because I've looked into the history. What happened was you had this was in the 1800s. You had these African American gangs that were walking around. They were robbing random white people. This happened in the state of Pennsylvania in the 1800s. This was going on. I can show you the book that I read this in. And hold on a second, guys. Why is this thing asking me for emojis? Please. So you had these gangs that were robbing people. This actually happened. And the robberies got so bad that it came to the point where people were saying, we're just going to go to a black neighborhood and destroy it. And I'm not saying it was good. All right, YouTube, don't report me. All right? Don't flag this stream. It was evil and wrong. I'm just saying what led up to it. What led up to it was basically gangs of thieves going around robbing people. And then what happened was insiders said, let's go destroy the black neighborhood. And they did. So what's happening now? We have high crime rates, and then we have more and more people expressing racist sentiment. Racism is back in this country, right? So on top of that, you have what? So you have the revival of the popularity of the belief that black folks should not be living amongst whites, and vice versa. You have black folks saying, we don't want no white folks living amongst us. And then on top of this phenomenon, we have more and more people in the United States saying the Jews are running everything and they're controlling our government. Enough is enough. It's like the entire world that was shaped in the aftermath of World War II is being shattered. That's what's happening. And we're going right back to the days when people said, we don't want no Jews running our politics. Oh no, we don't want no Jews. And we're going right back to the days of we don't want no black folks around us, and that's what it is. That's what's happening. Racism is coming back, and Anti-Semitism is coming back. That's what it is. And when you start seeing politicians gaining major electoral victories because they said, F AIPAC, I ain't funded by AIPAC, that's going to be the canary in the coal mine. And Israel will know by that point that it's screwed. You want to know what keeps Israel up at night? It's not Arabs. They don't care about Arabs, believe me. Arabs, you fire a gun, they run away. It's not Palestinians. Palestinians, they sit for decades. They've been equating the Palestinians with Hitler. Really? Look at Gaza. That's the Wehrmacht. That's the Wehrmacht, right? Really? So it's this insane false equivalency. They're not worried about Palestinians. What they're worried about is a bunch of Theo Vons saying, we hate Israel and we're tired of AIPAC controlling our politicians. We want to retake political control in this country. That is what worries them. Why do you think the AFD has a Zionist branch, by the way? The AFD is led by a Nazi named Bjorn Holke, who loves Hitler, by the way. The guy loves Adolf Hitler. He's made that pretty clear. And he wants a 180-degree shift from how Germans see the Holocaust. But the party that he helps to run has Zionists in its ranks. Why? If I had to put my conspiracy theory hat, that's just Israel's way of saying, hey, we just want to make sure that you guys don't get too carried away here. Now, if these nationalists butcher all of the dark-skinned refugees, Israel will be clapping its hands, applauding it. They just want to make sure that the AFD does not take that one step that is required for it to just go full Nazi. That's what they're worried about. So they can kill all the Africans. They can kill Syrians. Israel will be clapping its hands. What Israel is worried about is these nationalist groups going full anti-Semitism. Going gung-ho, full anti-Israel, anti-Semitic. That's what they're worried about because of the history. European nationalism does have a history of killing Jews. that really goes without saying. The Israelis overplayed their hand. I completely agree. And I think the problem is that the Israelis, they've been so used to Americans supporting them that they never thought that such a shift would ever happen. That's how confident they were. And now the shift is happening. And here's what people need to understand, especially the Zionist types. And this is a warning to the Israelis. This is me just warning you guys about a reality that is happening. Did you guys see the Piers Morgan interview with this girl who says that she proudly says the N-word? What's her name? Lily Gaddis or something like that? Her last name is Gaddis? Lily Gaddis talks about how she doesn't like black people and she calls them N-words. And then, so what happens is you have these, and this is a phenomenon that I've noticed for years now, you have these pro-Israel types or you have these Zionist types who come along and they say, oh, this is great. You know, we're seeing Westerners finally just having enough with all this woke nonsense. And look at them now. They're becoming nationalists. This is great. This is amazing. Look, the white people are rising up against this liberal garbage. And Lily Gaddis, I mean, she's holding the torch. She is just a warrioress. She's a warrioress against all this wokeism garbage. You guys are fools. And that's the nicest thing that I can say about you. You guys are fools. They will go against black people. That's true. Do not be foolish. Do not be foolish enough to think that they will stop at black people. They will go against the blacks, and they will go against the Jews. All these racists you see in Europe and in the Western world, they hate minorities and all that. These people are thugs. And what they do, it's a very effective strategy. And I know it's effective because, look, it's actually working. They're winning major elections. What they do is they first attack groups that are not popular. This is how they work. They first go after groups that are not popular. The Nazis played a similar strategy. They did not go against Jews in the beginning. In the beginning, they went against the mentally ill and the physically handicapped. People that society, by and large, doesn't really care about, unless you're running a charity or you're a part of the church or you're a religious person. Society, generally speaking, does not care about people who are handicapped or deformed. So the Nazis went against those people and killed them. In fact, Hitler was so brazen about it, and he was so indifferent to the reality that people would find out that he was killing retarded people, that he made an explicit order to kill retarded people. That's how much he did not give a shit. And that's how much he knew that other people wouldn't give a shit. He just went out in the open. He made a direct order to kill people with handicaps and deformities. So those were the first victims. And then they went against other people as well. Communists, they killed those people. They invaded Poland and they killed Polish people as well. The Jews sort of came last on their list. Even though they were the biggest target on their list, they came last. And the Nazis did not start to exterminate the Jews until the Nazis were in deep in their war with the Soviet Union. And they used that war to masquerade what they were doing. This is what genocidal regimes do. They use wars to justify and to hide what they're doing, to hide their genocide. And they will always say things like, well, we're in the middle of a war and we're dealing with an existential enemy, and this ethnic group or these people are a part of the existential threat, so therefore we are justified to do mass murder. This is how genocides always work. The Ottomans did this, the Germans did this. The French did this during the Revolutionary War. They said, oh, we're under a threat. The church is our enemy, and so they killed Catholics. So they first went against certain people that people, by and large, did not care about. This is how the Nazis worked. And this is how the Nazis today work. They haven't changed their strategy at all. So if you're one of these nationalist types and you think it's great that people are going against blacks, they will go against other people. If you're Jewish and you think it's great, you're a fool. You're a fool, and more than likely you're evil. If you're not naive, you're evil because you think it's okay to hate on an entire demographic because they are a member of that demographic. They will not stop at black folk. They will go against the blacks. They will go against the Jews. How do I know that? Look at Lily Gaddis's videos. She's not just bashing the blacks. She bashes the Jews. And no one really goes against her for going against the Jews. I wonder why. I don't see her followers bashing her because she goes against the Jews. I wonder why. Because anti-Semitism, alongside just plain old racism, is reviving. And if you're Jewish and you think that you're going to be immune, you're an idiot. Because you don't even look at the reality of your own history. The only thing that'll enable the return of the painter is if people in huge numbers start hating Jews. That's it. And you never know. Maybe one day we're all going to be elderly and children will ask us, why did this happen? And we'll say, well, it all started with some guy named Kanye West. The American/Western support is going to come to an end. And that is why, for example, Benjamin Netanyahu recently stated that Israel should start weaning off from the American financial funding, because every year the U.S. gives Israel, over $4 billion? And so Israel recently stated that perhaps Israel should start weaning off or getting away from relying on that American financial support. Why are the Israelis saying that? Because the Israelis know that what we have grown to, what we have become so accustomed to, which is America supporting Israel, is going to come to an end eventually. And the anti-AIPAC, the anti-ADL folks are taking over. the Tucker Carlsons, the Kanye Wests, the Candace Owens, the Theo Vaughns. These people are taking over, and Israel knows it. They see the writing on the wall. They're not stupid. So you see Netanyahu saying, I think eventually we're just going to have to get off of the American support. And why is Netanyahu saying that? Because he knows. He sees the writing on the wall. This is from the Washington Post. This was published just recently. And it says, in Middle East, Trump marginalizes Israel without helping Gaza. So Trump has been sort of bypassing Israel lately. At least this is what we're being told. And in the midst of this, Gaza is still getting bombed. A lot of people are being killed all the time in Gaza. And so what's the end game, really? Is Trump going to stop the war? Supposedly, the Americans are pushing the Israelis to finally agree to a ceasefire. The Israelis are not really interested in a ceasefire. Netanyahu knows that if he does a serious ceasefire, that it could mean the end of his political coalition. If his coalition ends, then his political career, as it is now, would end. And that's a danger to Netanyahu politically. So what is really, how is this whole thing going to play out? Is America going to stand closer to the other Near Eastern / Middle Eastern countries like Saudi Arabia, the Gulf Arab states, Turkey, etc.? And is America going to withdraw itself a little bit away from Israel? Or what's going to happen? That's for time to tell. That is for time to tell. But it is very interesting what we have been seeing recently. Trump didn't say, okay, Israel, you got to stop. Israel has to stop this. He didn't say that. But he did say we have to help the people in Gaza because they're starving, because Gaza right now is going through a borderline famine. But at the same time, and I said this in my last video, the United States is in a difficult predicament in the sense that you have two major U.S. allies that hate each other. And you have other U.S., Turkey and Israel. They hate each other. But Turkey is a huge member of NATO, second most armed country in NATO. Israel is America's biggest ally in the Middle East so far. And then you have the Gulf states, which are also allies to the United States. So UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia. We all know these countries. They're also allies with the United States. But they have tensions with Israel. They have issues with Israel. So the United States wants to please the Gulf Arabs because they're very wealthy, got a lot of money. They are big oil exporters. They're a huge, huge benefit for the American petrodollar. Very important for the U.S. petrodollar. And when it comes to the American empire, the petrodollar is king. So the Americans can't piss off those people. The Americans can't anger those people. The Americans want to keep those people close. At the same time, the Gulf Arab states are important as an ally against Iran, as a check against Iran. And then you have Turkey. Turkey is a very important ally given its geostrategic position. We've talked about this many times on this channel, but I'll continue to bring this up because it is pertinent to this discussion. You have the fact that Turkey is the access way. Turkey is the gateway into the Mediterranean from the Black Sea. The United States wants to keep Russia away from having any sort of limitless access into the Mediterranean from the Black Sea. America would prefer that Russia stays sort of landlocked in the Black Sea, or at least hindered from having access, somewhat hindered from having access into the Mediterranean from the Black Sea. So Turkey is very important because Turkey controls that access way. And if Turkey leaves the NATO alliance and then establishes some sort of an alliance with Russia, that would mean Russia having access, unbridled access, unhindered access into the Mediterranean from the Black Sea. So America cannot lose Turkey. At the same time, there's Israel. Israel is a non-Muslim country, so it doesn't have the problem of Islamic extremism. It does, but not from the Jewish community because they're not Muslims. At the same time, there is still a significant block in the American electorate that really supports Israel. especially when it comes to the American white boomer population. They are huge supporters of Israel. So that does play a role in influencing America's policy when it comes to Israel. So the U.S. doesn't want to lose Israel. Israel is basically a glorified, unmovable U.S. military base. It's just, it plays that important role for the U.S. in the Middle East. So the U.S. doesn't want to lose Israel. So what is the U.S. to do? The U.S. has to please all sides in some way. So it's been pleasing Turkey by telling the Turks, hey, you can take over Syria. Yeah, congratulations. The United States also wants Turkey to be in Syria because the United States wants to leave this post-World War II global order in which the U.S. just is the police officer of the world. So how is it going to do that without proxies? It needs proxies to do that. There are currently 2,000 American troops in Syria. And the United States, especially Donald Trump, wants to withdraw those troops from what I've read. So that would mean America necessitating a proxy to fill in the vacuum that the United States would leave. In comes Turkey. This is where Turkey comes into the equation. Turkey wants to control Syria because by controlling Syria, you become a major power in the Middle East. At the same time, by controlling Syria, Turkey begins its journey into reviving its empire. And Turkey wants to become the most powerful country in the Middle East. How do you do that? You control territory. You expand. Israel doesn't want this because Israel wants to be the biggest dog in the block. Israel wants to be the most powerful country in the Middle East. Bottom line. So this is why, for example, you can read stories of the Israeli Air Force and the Turkish Air Force flying jets over Syria, and they're both eyeing each other. They haven't killed each other yet, but they're eyeing each other. They're trying to flex their muscles. They're trying to intimidate each other. There are numerous air bases in Syria that were left behind after the fall of the Assad regime. Turkey wants to take control of those air bases. Israel doesn't want this. So, for example, there is an air base called the T4. I think it's called the T4 Air Base. And the T4 Air Base is on the crosshairs of Israel. And Turkey says that air base belongs to Turkey. And so Israel, as a show of strength, bombed the runway at the T4 airbase. And Turkey said, hey, back off. But the thing is that Israel only bombed the runway. Why did Israel only bomb the runway? Why didn't it bomb the rest of the base? Because Israel knew that Turkish military technology, Turkish military personnel were in that base, or possibly were in that base. And Israel did not want to escalate the situation into a serious conflict. So the United States has been trying to please Turkey. That's why you read also about Donald Trump having a conversation with Erdogan in which they discussed the United States resuming the F-35 sales program with Turkey. The United States, under Biden, stopped selling F-35s to Turkey. And then that's when you started hearing about Turkey accelerating its project to build its own indigenously made aircraft fighter or fighter jet. It's called the Khan fighter jet. And Turkey said, okay, America, you don't want us to buy F-35s? Okay, F you. We'll buy our own we'll make our own damn fighter jet. So they started accelerating their project to indigenously create their own fighter jet with the help of the British, of course. So it's not entirely indigenous. And so Donald Trump has a conversation with Erdogan, and together they float around the idea of allowing Turkey to buy F-35s again. Israel does not like this, and we'll talk more about this in a little bit, but Israel does not like this because Israel has always had the privilege of having the biggest, fiercest military edge in the Middle East. The United States has sold military equipment to the Israelis. And the United States has wanted to make sure in the past that Israel has the biggest, best military edge in the Middle East. If the United States starts to resume the sale of F-35s to Turkey, then Turkey would start having F-35s again. But then on top of that, Turkey would also have its own fighter jet. And no longer would Israel have the biggest military edge in the region. So the United States is trying to please Israel. Israel wants to take Gazan territory. And probably, 50% of Gaza is now fully under the control of the Israelis. The Israelis continue to move south. They are razing Rafah City. And now they're talking about what? They're talking about giving aid to the Gazans. But from what I have read, if you look at the areas that Israel plans to have these aid centers, they're in the south. Why are they in the south? Well, it has been suspected, and I don't think that this is very far-fetched, that Israel wants to put the aid centers in the south to push the Palestinians to the south, so that Israel could then occupy northern Gaza, where they will begin to build settlements. So Israel wants to take Gazan territory. Is the United States going to stop them? Probably not, because Israel needs to get something out of the deal. So more than likely, the United States is going to enable the Israelis to build settlements in Gaza. And that's going to lead to more ethnic tensions between the Jews and the Palestinians, because you'll have the settlers in Gaza, and they're not going to get along with the locals, and you're going to have violence, and then settlers are going to be killed, and more Palestinians are going to be killed, and it's not going to lead to anything good, and war and killing and horror is just going to continue on. And this nightmare is not going to end, right? This whole ethnic conflict between Jews and Palestinians, it's not going to end. It's not going to end because of Donald Trump. But all sides need to be pleased in some way, right? Trump did write the book, The Art of the Deal. So part of a deal is that people leave the room with something. The Arabs are going to get something. The Americans are getting something. They're getting massive Arab investments. The Israelis are going to get something. They're going to get more territory. They're going to expand their territory, and the Turks are getting something out of it. They're expanding their territory. They've already expanded their territory into Syria. But at the same time, there's this thing called southern Syria, and the Israelis have their troops on the south, and they don't want Turkey to control Syria, but the United States wants Turkey to control Syria. So what is America to do? And without getting too complicated into this subject, because it is sort of difficult to try to explain all this, I think eventually the United States is just going to about face from the whole damn thing. I think America is going to say, all right, Israel, it's your damn problem. This is your situation, not ours. And I think if America does that, and I think eventually America will do that, then what that will lead to, and I said this in my last video, is basically Israel becoming a fanatical society. I mean, there's already fanaticism in Israel, don't get me wrong, but I'm talking about a full-on fanatical society where the fanatics will just take over. Because then the fanatics would have the argument in which they would say, what was the point of being moderate for all those years? What was the point of following any rules? What was the point of listening to the U.S. in any capacity? Look at where that brought us. We have been abandoned. And so they will just say, we're going to take power because these moderates didn't really lead us to anything good. We're now going to do what we want to do, which is to get rid of the Palestinians completely. And the Israelis will have they will have a final solution type of a situation. So the Nazis, they had a meeting about the Holocaust, how they wanted to get rid of all the Jews and get rid of certain other people who they saw as a hindrance to the German race and to the whole aspiration of Lebensraum, or German living space. The Israelis are going to have their final solution meeting. And they're going to say, we're going to get rid of all these people. And we don't give a damn what anyone else says, because no one is really helping us. The U.S. has abandoned us, and we're going to do what we want. And if you think Gaza is bad, Wait until the future. It's going to be horrific. And my theory is that the Turks will be looking on from Syria. And they will say, look, our Palestinian brothers and sisters are being exterminated, and the Muslim world is calling upon us to do something, and the U.S. will do nothing about it because the U.S. has reclused itself from the world, so therefore we must be the heroes of the Muslim world. And the Turks will answer. And you will have Holocaust 2.0. So it says here that lucrative agreements for U.S. weaponry, planes, and AI chips were forged, while in multiple speeches, Trump gushed over the success of these wealthy states ruled by absolutist royals. So we don't listen. No one really gives a shit if these countries are ran by dictators. Dictator is not a bad word anymore. Let's be real here. In fact, you have a lot of people in the West who envy dictatorships. But lucrative agreements for U.S. weaponry, yes. Planes, AI chips, absolutely, yes. The Saudis, the Arabs, the Qataris, the UAE, they're going to be. They're going to be investing tons of money into the United States. This is what the Americans want. But the Americans also want to see some sort of normalization with the Arabs and the Israelis. But at the same time, it looks like that is not the most important thing. Because Donald Trump told the Saudis, yeah, we want you to normalize relations with Israel, but in your own time. In other words, Israel right now is not the most important thing. But the Saudis have told Donald Trump, listen, we can normalize relations with Israel as long as you recognize a Palestinian state. So is the United States going to recognize a Palestinian state? I have no idea. But if America actually recognizes a Palestinian state, holy moly. What a different world we would be living in if that happens. If that happens, it would be insane. That would spell and that would indicate a radical shift in U.S. policy in regards to Israel. So it says here that in a trip that seemed more about business than geopolitics, Trump still paid lip service to his hopes for peace. He extended a hand to Iran, gesturing to potential future talks over its nuclear program. Oh boy, the United States talking about making a deal with Iran. When did we last hear about this? Oh, that's right, when Obama was president and Donald Trump was bashing the deal and all the conservatives were bashing the deal. Now we see Donald Trump talking about making a deal with the Iranians. I wonder why. Oh, because making a deal is better than war. And they made this conclusion already when Obama was president. So now we're going back to Obama. So Mr. Obama was right in doing the Iran deal. And Donald Trump was wrong when he pulled out of the Iran deal. And when the Iran deal was first basically dissipated and neutralized and rescinded by the United States, I was writing articles saying this is a terrible idea. And do you know who was bashing me? All of the conservatards were bashing me. Oh, the Iran deal, you were starting with Iran, terrorism, blah, and now we're talking about, oh, I don't know, doing deals with Iran. Not just doing deals with Iran, but doing deals with Hamas, doing deals with the Houthis. Now we see Donald Trump saying, oh yeah, by the way, we have a ceasefire with the Houthis. And this is, it's so crazy. This is right after the Houthis bombed Tel Aviv. I mean, seriously, they bombed the airport in Tel Aviv. And Donald Trump says, yeah, we're doing a ceasefire with the Houthis. Yeah. And then Donald Trump, before that, Donald Trump invites Netanyahu for this important meeting, which was televised, by the way. And there's Netanyahu smirking behind the camera. And he has that sinister smirk. And Donald Trump looks him in the face and says, yeah, we're going to be doing deals. Well, it doesn't look at him in the face. But in front of freaking Netanyahu's face, Donald Trump says, we're going to be doing deals with Iran. It was a total middle finger to the Israelis. And I think Trump invited Netanyahu just to show him who's boss. You're not going to tell us what to do. So it is very interesting. Now, again, because you have these anti-Zionist types who listen to me, and if I'm not 100% anti-Israel, I have to hear all the bullshit comments. I'm not saying that Donald Trump is going to just abandon Israel. Donald Trump is still going to support Israel. Donald Trump is still going to say, hey, they need to bomb Gaza to kill terrorists. Donald Trump will probably enable, if he doesn't do this, maybe the next administration will do this, but the United States is going to more than likely enable the Israelis to build settlements in Gaza. Because like I've said, Israel is going to want to get something out of this deal, and Israel wants Gaza, and you have these fanatics, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich and the rest of the gang. They're pushing Natan to take territory in Gaza so that the Israelis can have settlements, the Jewish Israelis can have settlements in Gaza, because they believe that that land rightfully belongs to the Jews. And that's what the Israelis want. So I think the Israelis are going to get something out of this. But at the same time, the United States is not going to be so gung-ho pro-Israel. It's going to also share its favor with other Middle Eastern countries, especially the Gulf Arab countries and Turkey. The thing is that Turkey and Israel are enemies, so who's the United States going to stand with? Is it going to stand with Turkey? Well, then it'll lose Israel. Is it going to stand with Israel? Well, then it might lose Turkey to the Russians, and the United States doesn't want this. So what's going to happen? And I've said this numerous times, and people don't believe me. They say, oh, that's bullshit. America's always going to be a Zionist state, or a pro-Zionist state, however you want to say it. Turkey is more important geostrategically than Israel is. That's just a fact, because of the Dardanelles and the access way into the Mediterranean from the Black Sea through the Bosphorus Strait. So America does not want to abandon Turkey. So what is it going to do? That's why I say eventually the United States is going to tell the Israelis tough luck. And Israel overnight would basically be transformed into what it once was when the Second Temple got destroyed, where you had fanatics killing each other and the Romans were there. And only this time, the Jews are going to kill each other, just as they did during the Roman-Judean War. But the Romans are not exactly going to be there. It's going to be the Turks. And hell, if you look deep enough into history, Turkey was a pretty big part of the Roman Empire. Anatolia, as it was known. And there were a lot of Roman soldiers who came from Anatolia. And the Roman Empire was eventually transferred from Italy to Anatolia. And for the longest time, Anatolia was the headquarters for the Roman Empire. Then it became Muslim, so you had a Islamized Roman Empire. So in the future, it's not going to be technically the Romans, but it's going to be their Islamized descendants, their Islamized posterity in Israel, enacting violence. And I believe you will have a civil war between the Jews, but that civil war will not happen until fanaticism has reached an apex in that country. And I think if the United States tells the Israelis tough luck, fanaticism will reach its apex in that country. And Israel will be returning back to the times when the Judeans were killing each other, and they were vying over who was going to control the temple, and they were vying over who was going to control Jerusalem, and you had the Romans there. Only this time it's not going to be the Romans, it's going to be the Anatolians. And this is something that the U.S. wants, because the U.S., as I've said numerous times, wants to focus more on China than on Europe. It wants to focus more on China than the Middle East. So the U.S. is telling the Turks, you guys deal with the Middle East. Israel is crying about it. America is telling the Israelis they better be reasonable and get along with the Turks. So Israel is no longer holding the top position in the Middle East when it comes to American policy. It's not. Turkey is number one. It is, because Israel said, don't allow Turkey in. Oh, America's like, yeah. Trump tells Turkey, congratulations, Turkey, you just took over Syria. Israel says, don't lift the sanctions. U.S. says, we're lifting the sanctions. Don't do deals with Iran. U.S. says, yeah, they're already doing deals with Iran. Don't do any deals with Hamas. They're dealing with Hamas. Israel's no longer the top dog. Bottom line, Israel, the media reports, I think, have a kernel of truth in them. Israel has been sidelined, at least for now. And as I've said, I don't think Israel's going to be abandoned right now. Not now. But we're seeing the gradual process of the U.S. just sidelining the Israelis. Turkey is now the big empire in the Middle East. It's really interesting to see all this happening. It's a very different universe from the one that I grew up in, and from the one that we all grew up in as millennials. We grew up in a world where what Israel was the most important thing in the Middle East. Now, no one gives a shit about Israel. Unless you're a boomer or you're some Steve Crowder Republican. Why does the way of the wicked prosper? That's how it always has been. I'm sorry. It's true. It's always been that way. The signals he sent caused consternation in Israel. So Donald Trump saying, hey, to hell with neoconservatism, to hell with this interventionist policy, this sent shivers through the spine of Israel. And it says, ahead of Trump's trip, Israeli media and officials were already pointing to the way Trump has bypassed Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, a right-wing leader closely allied to the U.S. president who received numerous political gifts from the White House in Trump's first term. But in his second term, Trump's vision for the Middle East is not as yoked to that of Netanyahu. The Israeli leader couldn't have been pleased with Trump's overtures to Tehran, his unilateral truce with the Houthis, and his opening with Syria, which Israel has relentlessly bombed over recent months. So Donald Trump said, Israel, you want us to do what? To not lift the sanctions on Syria? We're going to lift the sanctions. You don't want us to have dealings with Iran? We're going to have dealings with Iran. And it says here, all the while, Israeli forces pounded the embattled Gaza Strip. Bombardments on alleged Hamas militant targets led to dozens of civilian deaths in the past few days. And the Israelis, listen, it goes without saying, they're very trigger happy because they know we can get away with it. And they're just bombing and killing, bombing and killing, bombing and killing African-American folks for decades. Were trying to tell the Americans about Israel. They were criticizing Israel. And they were ignored for the most part, right? You had the Mark Lamont Hills of the United States talking about this for many years. They were ignored for the most part. And in this particular war, the brutality has been so horrendous and the war crimes have been so numerous that now we got white folks talking about how much they're critical of Israel. And you're seeing more and more of them. Celebrities, some of them. Theo Vaughn being one of them. Tucker Carlson being another. There is a shift happening, not just in any demographic in the United States, but in the largest demographic in the United States, and that is the white demographic. And I've said this numerous times. This is the biggest fear that Israel has, is white people not liking Israel. Because that would spell the end for Israel's Western support. At the end of the day, it's not just about how much money you have to fund your campaign. Hell, didn't Bloomberg run against Trump? Wasn't Bloomberg trying to become the Democrat nominee at one point in time? And Bloomberg lost. Well, Bloomberg's got billions. That didn't help him. Because it's not just about money. Money is not the only thing that wins elections. Money is a means to an end. The end being an election victory. But what is going to get people to vote for you, ultimately, is if they like you. And if you have opinions that resonate with what voters are experiencing, or with if you have views that are resonating with what voters are feeling, they're going to vote for you. And if you have enough people saying that AIPAC has had way too much damn power in this country, and a politician comes out and says, I'm not funded by AIPAC, a lot of people are going to vote for that guy. And when you start seeing people winning based on the selling point that they're not getting funded by AIPAC, that is going to spell the end for Israel. Ever since I started warning people about the revival of Nazism, I always sort of second-guessed myself. Right? I always doubted myself. I always questioned myself. And when I first started warning people about the revival of Nazism, that was when I had the strongest doubts about what I was saying. Now I still have some doubt, but it's much smaller than it was when I first started making this prediction. But I used to second guess myself a lot more. I used to say, well, Ted, how do you know what you're saying isn't crazy? How do you know what you're saying is not far-fetched or just ridiculous? But every single year that passes, it gets crazier and crazier. Every year that transpires, the things that occur, the events that happen, really do substantiate what I've been saying since 2016. I said Nazism is going to come back. No one believed me. Nobody. Except for some Serbian dude online. And then you see every year, ever since 2016, it has become just clearer and clearer that I was right. And now we see the most famous rapper in history saying Heil Hitler. It's just crazy. And so now I still have some doubt. I still could be wrong. But I have a lot less self-doubt about what I said back in 2016. Being 30 years old to see the rise of the alt-right in the 2010s and until now is really incredible. It is. It is. And here's the thing is, it has never gone away. I started noticing it in 2016. I said, guys, Nazism is coming back. No one believed me. With a few exceptions, but no one, generally speaking, believed me. And every year since then, it has just become clearer and clearer and clearer that I was correct and that I'm still correct. And not only does it become clearer and clearer, it gets crazier by the year. 2016, we were talking about what AfD was rising up. AfD was still a fledgling party. And now it's the second biggest party in Germany. I said that Nazism was going to make a return. I talked about how Hitler was making a comeback back in 2017. A rap song that is being listened to by millions says Heil Hitler. It just gets crazier and crazier. I don't know what else to say. Ted, you should make a timeline of events starting at 2016 on your computer so you can pull it up and show people. I should. That's a good idea. I should do an article. I need to go back to all of my articles that I wrote, going back to 2016, warning people about the rise of Nazism, and then just put excerpts from all those articles into one giant article, and then put timestamps on all the various excerpts to show a continual timeline from 2016 to now, wherein I was warning people about the revival of Nazism. In the 2010s, alternative media became dominated by alt-right types. Yep, in 2000s it was more diverse landscape. So in the 2010s, the alt-right was dominating YouTube. And then what happened was YouTube underwent a massive campaign of censorship, and they began to disable people's accounts. People who were alt-right, people who were big figureheads in the alt-right movement, started seeing their accounts getting disabled by YouTube, and those people vanished from YouTube. People like Stefan Molyneux, people like Varg Vikernes and the like, they just disappeared. So for a number of years, especially I would say during the Biden years, it seemed like those people were gone and that the whole alt-right phenomenon was just dissipated. But after Musk bought X, it came back, and not only did it come back, but it came back with a vengeance. It came back with a much more intense viciousness. And now the whole alt-right phenomenon is loud and clear, and it is really transpiring itself. It's very active, but it's much bigger than it was in the 2010s. And because it was being censored for so many years, when it was allowed to come back, it came back with a fury because it was being suppressed for so long. It's like when you cover a pot of boiling water and you try to keep the lid on, and no matter how much you try to keep the lid on, no matter how long that lid stays on, eventually the lid starts to shake, and eventually the water will seep out from underneath the lid because it's being suppressed for so long that the pressure just keeps building up, and eventually the water is just going to boil over, and it's going to boil out of the pot. That's what it felt like after Elon Musk bought X, and it just blew up. And it blew up with a viciousness. So it really has become a Leviathan that no one can ignore. No one. And that online presence, this presence of this fanatical Leviathan online, has been really manifesting itself in real life outside of the online spaces. It has been showing its head in real life, and we see this with the whole N-word popularity and the Silly Gaddis girl and the Kanye West song, and these are all manifestations of reality. These are all manifestations of a political trend that continues to grow, and it's quite disturbing. I think it's called the woke right. Yeah, but you see, when they say the woke right, I mean, this is a label that just doesn't work, and it's not going to work, and it's eventually just not going to be heard anymore. It's eventually going to become a thing of the past. The reason why I say that is because the people who are utilizing the term woke right are some of these big voices in the conservative movement, or in this whole fence-sitting movement, I guess you could call it, or pro-Israel movement. So it's basically the right-wingers or the conservatives who are pro-Israel who are using this term. And the reason why they're using this term is because they want to dissuade people from supporting a political faction that is anti-Semitic. So you have this growing anti-Semitism, and then on the other side, you have the Konstantin Kissins, and you have people like him who are popular amongst the right. They're popular amongst conservatives, but at the same time, they are pro-Israel. So then what happens, right? You have these two competing factions. You have one faction that is anti-Israel, right-wing and anti-Israel, anti-Semitic, they love Hitler. And then you have this other faction of right-wing or conservative that is pro-Israel. So the right-wing faction that is pro-Israel is threatened by the anti-Israel faction of the conservative or right-wing movement. So what are they doing? They know that the anti-Israel right-wingers and the pro-Israel right-wingers both agree on the woke left. They both agree that woke is bad, and they say if you go woke, you go broke. So the pro-Israel conservatives are now labeling the anti-Israel right-wingers as the woke right to try to dissuade people from following that particular political persuasion. I could be wrong, but this is the impression that I'm getting just from sheer observation, because I've noticed Konstantin Kissin, who is a Ukrainian Jewish guy or a Russian Jewish guy who is pro-Israel, has been using this term. He's been saying, oh, the woke right, because he himself sees this rising tide against Israel amongst the right wing, and he's threatened by it. So he's saying, oh, they're woke. So he's basically trying to make it out as if those people are like the left. They're like on the other side of the coin of the left. It's not going to work, because it's just not. And the reason why I say that is because no matter what you say, you're not going to stop people from hating on Israel, because the hatred towards Israel is not based on, it's not something that's come out of the air. It's based, and I'm not saying that it's right to hate Israel, but it is based on realities. And the realities, amongst these realities, is the fact that so many politicians have been funded by AIPAC. And so a lot of people hate this, and they want it to end. So because that hatred is there, or because that anger is there, and it's based on reality, or it's justified on something that's real, you can call them woke right all you want. That's not going to get people to wake up and say, oh, I don't want to be woke, so I'm going to now support Israel. That's just not how any of this stuff works. That's not why you have movements. That's not why ideological trends come up into existence. That's not why any of that happens. That's not why political trends happen. Political trends don't happen based on words. political trends happen based on realities. So Konstantin Kisin can use the term woke right all he wants. It's not going to work for him. I remember when you said Nazism is coming back in an article, I was like, what? And so I waited, and here we are. Yeah, like I said, no one really believed me. And I don't blame people for not believing me, because it is a crazy thing to say, and I didn't really believe myself that much. But at the same time, I just had this intuition from what I saw around me. And I said, I think it's making a comeback. And what really convinced me that it was, or what really got me to say that Nazism was making a comeback, was the refugee/migrant crisis of 2015. I said, man, all these Europeans are hating on these migrants. They're going to vote for a Hitler. This is what I said back in 2016. Wait till we get to 2030. Oh, it's going to be even crazier. Yes. Like I said, things are getting crazy by the year. So imagine what it's going to look like by 2030. Yeah, the world is going to be even more hilarious. It's going to be scarier. On Thursday alone, local groups said Israeli attacks killed more than 100 people. The director of a hospital in northern Gaza told my colleagues of one incident where they received the bodies of 20 children killed Wednesday. And the Israelis are going to sit there and they're going to say, well, the reason why those children were killed was because there just so happened to be one member of Hamas who was in the same building as they were in. So we just blew up the whole building and killed everyone inside of it. We didn't mean to kill the children. They're just collateral damage. This is what they say. They're just collateral damage. You can only go so far with this argument until people really start to question your true motives, because we actually have X-ray evidence. We actually have evidence that Israeli snipers deliberately shoot kids. There is an interview that you can listen to of an American Jewish doctor. He's not Palestinian. He's not Muslim. He's an American Jewish doctor. And he is saying, I can't tell you how many times I saw kids with bullet holes. He said this. He went to Gaza as a charity doctor. And he said, I can't tell you how many times I saw kids with bullets inside of them. Snipers are deliberately targeting kids. And there are X-rays that you can see. And the New York Times did an article about this. The Israelis were very upset by the New York Times article because of how damning it was. And they said, oh, it must be fake. Oh, the New York Times made it up. This is fabricated. And the New York Times came out and said, we stand by our article. We are not going to retract the article. And you can see the photos of the X-ray images on the article. And you can see the X-ray showing a child's skull and a bullet is in the skull. You can see another X-ray image of a child and the bullet is in the child's neck. They deliberately target kids. So they can only go so far with, oh, we just hit this building and yeah, kids died. It's very sad, but that wasn't our intention. Then why are Israeli snipers sniping kids? The United States wants to try to please all of its allies, Israel, Turkey, the Gulf Arab states. Israel wants something. What does Israel want? It wants to expand into Gaza. So the United States, I could be wrong, but the United States is going to allow Israel to expand into Gaza. They're already expanding into Gaza, but they're going to allow Israel to have settlements in Gaza. I'm just going to say it. I'm not even going to hedge my bets. Well, I will. Okay, I could be wrong. But I'm going to say it. They're going to enable Israel to build settlements in Gaza. I think this is pretty obvious. The fact that they have all these soldiers in northern Gaza, the fact that they're telling people to leave their homes. They're not just going to, allow these people to come back to their homes. Oh yeah, you can come back. That's not going to happen. They're pushing people out of their homes. They're pushing them into the south. They're driving them into the south. They're going to take over at least a half of Gaza. And they're going to put settlements. And so in that way, Israel could say, oh, look, we got something out of this war. And then Natan could say, or the Likud party could say to the more fanatical parties, look, we got some settlements for you guys. Ooh, happy, some more land. And that's what this is about. So they're going to help the Israelis in this way. And they're going to, and the Turks are pissed off about it. Sure, they don't like what's happening. But guess what? The U.S. has told the Turks, hey, Turkey, you get yourself a whole new country. So Turkey gets something out of it. But Israel also wants control over Syria. So they both can't be running Syria at the same time. Eventually there's going to be a clash between the Turks and the Israelis. On Monday, Trump hailed the release of Israeli American Edan Alexander, the last U.S. citizen abducted by Hamas, to be freed, and it indicated on social media that the decision to return him to Israel was a step taken in good faith by Hamas. So Trump is saying, oh, look, Hamas is making a good step, a good faith gesture towards Israel. Look, they've given us the last American hostage. And this is a way for the United States to say, look, Hamas can be reasoned with. And this is a way for the United States to justify brokering a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. Implicit in the White House's messaging was an impatience with Netanyahu. So the Americans are becoming impatient with Netanyahu, who many see as an impediment to attempts to forge a lasting ceasefire. And do you know who thinks that Netanyahu is a hindrance to peace? Donald Trump does. Donald Trump believes that Netanyahu is an impediment to peace. So if I tell you Netanyahu is an impediment to peace, don't sit there and say, oh, that's a far left talking point. So Donald Trump is far left? Because that is exactly what Donald Trump said back in 2021. That's what he said. He said, Netanyahu never wanted peace. So the Israelis are adamant about taking Gazan territory. And I think the Americans are going to allow that to happen. But at the same time, the Americans are going to give a gift to Israel, but that gift is going to have strings attached. And they're going to want the Israelis to do certain things. And they're going to want the Israelis to put up with certain things that the Israelis do not want to put up with. And one of those things is going to be not messing with the Turks in Syria. That's going to be a big thing. And remember what Donald Trump told Mr. Netanyahu. He said, Mr. Netanyahu, you have to be reasonable. You have to be reasonable with Erdogan. So it says here that some of Netanyahu's far-right allies have made clear their desire to remove much of the territory's Palestinian population and occupy it indefinitely. Yup, this is what the Israelis want to do. And it's going to happen. I'm afraid to say it, but it's going to happen. I hope I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, I'll be happy. But I'm afraid that this is the truth, that Israel is going to take Gazan territory. Gaza has been a territory of death and destruction for many years. This is what Donald Trump said, by the way. These are his words. Donald Trump said this when he was talking to the Gulf Arabs. He said, Gaza has been a territory of death and destruction. And he said, I have concepts for Gaza that I think are very good. Make it a freedom zone. Let the United States get involved and make it just a freedom zone. So here is something that I don't think here is something that I do not believe Israel wants. Israel wants to control Gaza. But Donald Trump is saying what? The U.S. wants to control Gaza. And so what Trump is pushing for is antithetical to Israel's desire. Because like I said, Israel wants to be the one controlling Gaza. And the U.S. is telling the Israelis, we'll control Gaza. And even if the U.S. controls Gaza, they're still going to give Israelis what they want. They're still going to allow the Israelis to have settlements. But it'll be under American superintendence. This is what Trump's plan is, I believe. But at the same time, back home in the U.S., there is this rising tide that is growing against Israel. So what happens when enough Americans say, we're tired of watching over Israel? The United States, let's say in this hypothetical scenario, the U.S. does take control over Gaza. And there is a coordination between the Americans and the Israelis. What happens when enough Americans say, we're tired of watching over Israel's affairs? Eventually, the United States will say, okay, Israel, it's your problem. And Israel will smile and say, we finally got what we wanted. And I could imagine this scenario. America will leave the Gaza Strip. Israel will take full control. And then more settlements will be built. Atrocities will be done. bloodshed will break forth, and the Israelis will say, we have to do our final solution. And the Turks will be there watching. And the Turks will say, we have to put an end to it. And there's going to be a big problem for Israel. I could see this happening, right? This is another possible scenario that I can see happening. For Netanyahu, who used to have his settler allies drive policy in Trump's first term, Trump 2.0 must present a shock, says Elon Goldenberg, senior vice president and chief policy officer at J Street, a liberal pro-Israel organization in Washington. And Mr. Elon Goldenberg goes on to say, as for Trump, his friends in the Gulf are showering him with deals and wins. When he looks at Benjamin Netanyahu's and far-right leader Itamar Ben-Gvir's Israel, he sees headaches. Oh, this is an interesting observation. So Mr. Elon Goldberg, who is this policy expert when it comes to Israel, says that when Trump looks at the Gulf Arabs, he sees deals, he sees an openness and an enthusiasm to work with the Americans. But when he sees the Israelis, what does he see? According to Mr. Goldenberg, Donald Trump sees headaches. And he's right. It is a bunch of headaches. That's what it is. It's headaches. Breaking the ceasefire, not wanting to do a ceasefire, going behind Donald Trump's back to conspire to do a war on Iran against Donald Trump's consent. These are all headaches. But with the Gulf Arabs, what does he get? Deals. The Arabs welcome Donald Trump with open arms. They embrace Trump. They're very enthusiastic about investing in the American economy. Donald Trump sees success and deals in the Gulf Arab world. But with Israel, he sees what? As Mr. Goldenberg said, headaches. Eventually, the Americans are going to just tell the Israelis, listen, you guys are a headache. And so it says here that amongst these headaches are what? Endless war on Gaza, the Israeli political leadership bent on sabotaging Iran talks, and an Israel that doesn't seem ready to make the political concessions that would be needed before it can further integrate into the region. So it says here, in Israel, analysts view the signals emerging from Trump's trip with an alarm. In Trump's worldview, Israel is not necessarily a strategic ally in the deep, classic, and values-based sense, but more of a premium client, perhaps even a Middle Eastern real estate asset, wrote Oded Aliam, a former top Israeli intelligence official in Israel Hayom, a popular daily. So this former Israeli intelligence officer is saying that in Trump's worldview, Israel is not necessarily a strategic ally in the deep, classic, and values-based sense, but more of just a client. And it says here, we must consider the deep changes that are underway within the Republican Party itself and within Trump's inner circle, he added, gesturing to the sidelining of neoconservatives and Iran hawks in Trump's team. And he's absolutely right. I think he's right. He is saying we are seeing the sidelining of the neocons. These are all signs. These are all signs of what I have been warning you guys about for years now, and that is eventually the United States is going to throw Israel under the bus. I'm not saying it's going to happen next year. I'm not saying it's going to happen in the next 5 years, although it could, but I'm saying eventually it's going to happen. And what we are witnessing is the gradual paving of the path towards this denouement, towards this end. Israel must recognize that Trump in 2025 is a different political creature. And the Republican Party is no longer what it once was. Hello. The Republican Party is no longer what it once was. I talked about this in my last stream. I said, there is a battle that is going on, albeit it is a very uneven battle. But there is a battle nonetheless that is taking place between who? The MAGA Republicans, the MAGAites, and the old Republican Guard. The MAGAites are on the ascendancy. They are in the majority. They are the majority. And they are winning in this ideological war against the neocons. And Mike Waltz's firing is a sign of this, I should say. It's very surreal what is happening. But we can see it. We're seeing these little signs that are really indicating what is occurring underneath this political stage. And you see, this is what they're latching onto, right? They're talking about Muslims because you see, this is how it works. What the Zionists want is for us to hate on the Muslims. They don't want us to focus on AIPAC. They don't want us to focus on the Israel lobby. They don't want us to focus on Israeli war crimes. But we are focusing on those things. And that's the dilemma that Israel is in. The dilemma that Israel is in right now is the fact that Westerners are focusing on AIPAC and the ADL and Israel and Israeli war crimes. Hell, friggin' Elon Musk is bashing the ADL. Do you know what Tucker Carlson said about the ADL recently? He said F them. He said F the ADL. And do you know what Elon Musk said not too long ago about the ADL? He told the ADL to go F themselves. He said this, I think it was about a year or so ago. He said, they can go F themselves. He said the ADL can go F itself. And they said, what? And Elon Musk said, go F yourself. Is that clear enough for you? This is what Musk said. And he's the richest dude in the world. Tucker Carlson, the biggest voice in the American right now, in the American right-wing media, he says F the ADL. If you don't think that a change is happening, then you're oblivious. You're truly oblivious to this reality. It is the reality. And so that's Israel's biggest dilemma, is the West is focusing on the problems with Israel and the influence that AIPAC has had on American politics and the influence that the ADL has on American society. So they want us to focus on, the Texas Muslim compound. Well, guess what? That Texas Muslim compound, it ain't going to happen. Because most people in Texas don't want it. I'll just say it. I'll just put it this way. People in Texas don't want it. And while people don't want the Muslim compound, while people don't want Muslim terrorism, guess what they don't want as well? Guess what they also don't want? They also don't want AIPAC. So you can bash the Muslims all you want. The Laura Loomers of the world, the Ben Shapiros and the Mark Levines, they're on the decline. They're in the losing battle. They're not in the winning battle here. Because the people who don't like Israel also don't want the Muslim stuff. So you're not going to win. The train has been set, my friends. So it says here, have Trump and Netanyahu fallen out over Gaza? Donald Trump's Gulf visit was closely watched in Israel, but overshadowed by speculations in Israel that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Trump are no longer on the same page. And it says here, if you take the last month and certainly the last week in a series of moves and a series of statements, Trump not only completely sidelined Netanyahu and kept him out of the loop, but marginalized Israel as if it was not an ally, former senior Israeli diplomat Alon Pinkas told DW. And it says here, meanwhile, Israel has intensified its airstrikes in Gaza, a possible indication that it is expanding its offensive in Gaza. On Friday, heavy strikes and tank movements were reported in northern Gaza. According to local health authorities, at least 90 people were killed in strikes across Gaza, including many children. The Israeli military has issued more evacuation orders in several areas, forcing many people to flee to areas that are equally unsafe. Now, why are they making people flee? Because they want to take territory. That's it. Those people are leaving. More and more people are going to leave. And Israel is going to say, okay, you guys can't come back. You have to stay where you're at. And Israel is going to take Gaza. Maybe not all of Gaza, but Israel is going to take at least a huge chunk of Gaza. That's what's going to happen. And it says here, and let me make sure you guys can see this. In April, Netanyahu was invited to an urgent meeting in Washington. Netanyahu said he thought he could convince Trump to remove U.S. tariffs on Israeli imports, but he wasn't able to do so. Instead, Trump seemed to take Netanyahu by surprise when he announced direct U.S.-Iran talks regarding Iran's nuclear program. So here comes Netanyahu, and he thinks, okay, I'm going to convince the Americans to end the tariffs on Israeli imports. And he did not succeed in doing so. And then, to make matters worse, to put insult to injury, Donald Trump tells Netanyahu, yeah, we're going to be doing deals with Iran, which is the exact opposite of what Israel asked for. Israel asked for no deals with Iran. And then Trump says, no, we're going to do a deal with Iran. What is this about? This is about sidelining the Israelis. This is about America's interest. This is also a reflection of the growing sentiments against American interventionism. Right? It's the zeitgeist that we're living in. It's a different time. This is the transition that we are living through. It's a transition out of the old system of being pro-Israel, of supporting Israel. We're now seeing the U.S. doing the opposite of what Israel has been asking for, and we're seeing this being done by a Republican. Now, if this was being done by a Democrat, we would be less surprised because Democrats have been the party that has tended to be more critical of Israel. But we're seeing this coming out of the Republican Party. So now you know that it's a different zeitgeist that we are living through. This is what I'm talking about. So it says here, another decision that caused a stir in Israel was Trump's announcement on May 6th that the U.S. had reached a truce with the Houthi group in Yemen, just 2 days after the rebels launched a missile at Israel's main international airport, Ben Gurion. The Houthis vow to continue launching missiles at Israel as long as the Gaza war continues. So not only does Trump tell the Israelis that there's a ceasefire with the Houthis, but he tells the Israelis this after the Houthis bombed Israel's airport in Tel Aviv. It's a sign. So it says here that Israeli commentator Pinchas suggested that Trump doesn't like Netanyahu's manipulations and constant deception on both Iran and Gaza. And I think this is true. Why do I say this? Because during Trump's first term, Netanyahu was bragging about how it was so easy for him to influence the U.S. government, how it was so easy for him to just get what he wants. And Trump heard this, and he said, oh, this guy thinks that I'm a sucker. This guy thinks that I'm just easily manipulated. I'm not going to allow him to have this sort of impression. I'm going to do the opposite of what he wants just to show him who's boss. And Trump hates being manipulated. Trump doesn't like this idea. He doesn't like the idea of another political leader thinking that he can easily manipulate him. So Donald Trump is telling the Israelis off. You want us to not do deals with Iran? We're going to do deals with Iran. Oh, Mr. Mike Waltz, you think that you can easily lie to me and go behind my back and talk with Netanyahu about a coordinated attack on Iran? Well, Mr. Mike Waltz, go screw yourself. So Pinchas says Netanyahu can only give Trump two things that he has refused to give until now. A ceasefire in Gaza, which Netanyahu violated himself in March. Perhaps he misinterpreted Trump's laziness or disinterest as some kind of green light to attack again. And the second is Iran. While Trump keeps on saying he wants an agreement with Iran and that he will pursue an agreement, Netanyahu keeps on with his belligerent rhetoric. And so Mr. Pinchas is saying that Netanyahu can only give Trump two things: ceasefire and a deal with Iran. That's it. And Donald Trump has so far seen Netanyahu refuse to give both of those things. And it says here, I hear voices in Israel saying that he completely sidelined Netanyahu, but I think it is more complicated than that, says Yaki Dayan, a former Israeli consul general in the U.S., and now a frequent commentator on Israeli-American relations and local media. I think he, Donald Trump, is taking into account all these issues that are extremely important for Israel in terms of normalization, with the Syrians and with the Saudis. So Donald Trump wants to accelerate the process towards normalization in order to create an alliance against Iran. But the Arabs do not like the idea of normalization with Israel, while Israel is butchering the Palestinians. And here is another thing to keep in mind. The great majority of Saudi Arabians, the great majority of Gulf Arabs, do not like the idea of normalization with Israel. And the reason why they don't like this idea is because of Gaza, is because of the Palestinian issue. So the Saudis have said, we can do normalization with Israel, but America needs to recognize a Palestinian state. So Trump is telling the Israelis, you guys have to make a deal with the Palestinians so that we can move on and go forward with this plan of normalization so that we can create an alliance against the Iranians. So this is the reason as to why the United States is pushing Israel to actually agree to a ceasefire. Is it going to happen? Who knows? We have yet to see. If I had to guess, I think there is going to be a ceasefire. And I think that talks towards creating an alliance against Iran are going to happen. I think that process is going to happen because the Iranian threat is a very serious one. But it's not going to work in the end because eventually the Israelis are going to pursue their own interests. It's going to further cause more chaos, more destabilization, and it's just going to end with a war between Turkey and Israel. Because Israel, while it does want this alliance against Iran, also has its own interests. And those interests are what? Keeping Turkey out of Syria. That's one of the biggest interests that it has. But as I've said, Turkey is a major NATO member. So America isn't going to piss off the Turks to please the Israelis. And so eventually the Americans are going to tell the Turks and the Israelis, you guys handle this. The entire world suddenly hating Israel and Jewish people feels too convenient. This will make them look to a political savior and declare him the Messiah. Yep. Exactly. And so once Israel sees that it's alone and abandoned, they're going to say, okay, here comes the Messiah. And you're going to have a political opportunist who's going to rise up and he's going to say, this is our time. This is my chance. I'm the Messiah. And a lot of people are going to follow him. And he's going to be an antichrist. And they're going to try to build their third temple. They're probably going to build their third temple. And there's going to be bloodshed. And the Jews are going to try to exterminate the Palestinians. And you're going to have the Turks entering the region to save the Palestinians from the Israelis. And it's going to be a Holocaust. This is why I said years ago, Israel will become another Auschwitz. Israel is going to become one giant Auschwitz. I don't say that because I think it's a good thing. I'm saying that because I'm warning people about this reality. Israel will become an Auschwitz. I'm not saying it's a good thing. Don't report me, freaking YouTube. Don't flag this video. Israel will become another Auschwitz. And it's going to be terrible. The worst thing that can happen to Israel is for everyone to leave them alone. Pretty much. Yeah, that is actually true. That's a good way to put it. They need conflict to unite the country. It's been that way since the beginning of Israel. 100% true. I agree. Yes, Israel needs conflict to stay united. If Israel does not have a conflict to deal with, Israel will destroy itself. And we know this for a fact because before October the 7th, what was happening? There was this massive anti-Netanyahu movement. There was this massive rift going on within Israeli society. You had the whole Kaplan demonstrations that were taking place. You had so many Israelis partaking in the demonstrations against the Likud government. I think it was something like, I don't know, the percentage of Israeli society that participated in those demonstrations was definitely in the double digits. It was huge. And there were talks, serious talks about civil war in Israel. Serious talks about how there was going to be a civil war as a result, as a reaction to Netanyahu wanting to do an entire judicial overhaul in the Supreme Court. And he wanted to diminish the entire authority of the Supreme Court. And even Netanyahu himself suspended talks on the judicial overhaul. And he said, to prevent a civil war, I'm going to put a recess on this thing. Let's do a recess. Even Netanyahu was talking about a civil war potentially happening in Israel. So it was very serious. So my theory, this is my conspiracy theory, is that Netanyahu and his gang got together and they said, we got a civil war in our hands here. What are we going to do? What are we going to do to stop it? Let's just start a war with Gaza. And they knew that Hamas was planning something big, and they let it happen. Why did they let it happen? They let it happen. They allowed it to happen to create a conflict. And they hit multiple birds with one stone. By doing the conflict, they can take more territory. By allowing the conflict, they really sparked a ripple effect in the Middle East, where the Houthis started to attack Israel. And then Israel said, look, we're on a multi-front war. We're on a multi-front war against the Houthis and Hamas. And then Hezbollah started attacking Israel. So they demolished Hezbollah. And Israel said, we're on a multi-front war. Houthis, Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, all at the same time. Bashar al-Assad got overthrown. And then Israel sent its troops into Syria. So that created another front for Israel. And as long as there's conflict, they can hinder any sort of massive divisions or massive violent rifts within Israeli society. So by having conflict, they prevent civil war. If there is no conflict and everything just calms down, you'll see Israelis go right back to doing massive demonstrations. And in fact, we've already been seeing this even during the war. So the war has not been enough to suppress this growing rift within Israeli society. So if the war cannot stop it, nothing's going to stop it. The war is just a speed bump. Eventually, this whole thing's going to get out of hand. Eventually, it's going to get out of hand. A Turkish and Saudi patronage under an American umbrella places Syria fully in the pro-American camp, raising a fortified wall against Iranian ambitions to return to the region. And here's the thing. Sure, right? Turkey and Saudi Arabia being in Syria could create this giant wall against Iran. But the thing is that Iran is not Israel's biggest worry. The biggest worry for Israel is Turkey. And because Turkey is in the NATO camp, and because it's the second biggest member in NATO, that means Israel has an even bigger problem on its hands. Because America is thinking, we'll put Turkey and Saudi Arabia in Syria, and that will be a check against the Iranians. And the Israelis are thinking, wait a second, what about us and Turkey? We're enemies. They don't like us. And you're just going to allow them to take over Syria? Yes. Because at the end of the day, it's not about Israel. It's about America's geopolitical / geostrategic interest. And it is of the utmost importance that NATO maintains its control on the access way from the Black Sea to the Mediterranean. And how does it do that? By keeping alliances with Turkey. And it doesn't matter if Turkey is an enemy of Israel. It doesn't matter if Turkey has said several times that it wants to invade Israel and destroy Israel. That doesn't matter. Because what matters at the end of the day is America's geostrategic / geopolitical interest. And Israel, when it comes to geopolitical interests, Israel will be sidelined. And we got a sample of this with Trump's recent trip in the Middle East. And so this is a very difficult conundrum for Israel because, yes, when it comes to the Iranian threat, Israel can work with the Americans against Iran because Iran is an ally of Russia. And at the end of the day, it's about weakening and diminishing the power of Russia. So yeah, America will go against Iran because Iran is a Russian ally. So Iran hates Israel. America will shamelessly sit there and say, oh, well, we're going against Iran because they're an enemy of Israel and they want to kill all the Jews. And they'll just use that as a way to justify, they'll just use that as a cover-up for their true motivation. And their true motivation is of a geopolitical nature. It's not of a moral or principled nature. This is why I say it's shameless. Turkey has talked about destroying Israel. Turkey has talked about invading Israel. Why isn't America bashing Turkey? Why isn't America saying, oh, well, they want to kill all the Jews and they're just like Hitler, so we can't be with them? Why isn't America doing that? Because it's not about protecting Jews from another Holocaust. It's about geopolitical interests. And when it comes to geopolitical interests, Turkey has more weight than Israel does because of the Dardanelles and the Bosphorus and the Sea of Marmara and the access way into the Mediterranean from the Black Sea. So Israel, because Turkey is an ally of NATO, because it's a giant member of NATO, Israel cannot say, oh, America help us against Turkey, because America will not help Israel against Turkey because of Turkey's position in the world. So America is not going to sit there and say, well, Turkey, they're like another Hitler. They're not going to use that. They're not going to use the same propaganda that they used against Iran against Turkey. They're not going to do that. Because it is not advantageous for NATO to do so. That's it. So Israel is in a bit of a pickle. It's stuck. This is why I say this is a train that has been stopped. This is a train that has been set and can't be stopped. So just imagine this scenario. America tells Israel, you know what? We're not really going to get involved with your problems anymore, so goodbye. More and more people in Israel get really terrified by this. They leave Israel by the droves. That will start even more brain drain. That'll lead to even more brain drain in the country. Then the fanatics are going to say, you see where this led us? This led us to nothing. We're alone. No one's going to help us. We Israel, we must become a massive force here in the Middle East. And we have to kill our enemies or else they're going to kill us because we're alone and no one's going to help us. No one gives a shit about us. So we have to do massive killing of the enemy. And they start exterminating the Palestinians. And then in comes Turkey. And the fanatics are going to say, look, we're so in danger. We have to keep slaughtering the enemy. Let's build a temple. And Israel is in such danger. We need a hero. Here comes the Messiah. The Messiah comes. Let us build a third temple. And they're going to build this third temple. And they're going to kill even more people. They're going to kill other Jews who disagree with them. This is what I'm foreseeing when it comes to Israel. So it says here, Turkish and Saudi patronage under the American umbrella places Syria fully in the pro-American camp, raising a fortified wall against Iranian ambitions to return to the region. This will allow Trump to complete the withdrawal of American forces from Syria and promote the integration of Syrian Kurds into Syria's governing apparatus, especially in the wake of the Kurdistan Workers' Party, which Turkey has been fighting for 45 years, announcing that it was disbanding. So this is a very big deal, by the way. This is a massive deal. The PKK, the Kurdistan Workers Army, has been at war or was at war with the Turkish government for over 4 decades. Tens of thousands of people were killed in this conflict. And all of a sudden, seemingly out of nowhere, the PKK says, yeah, we're disarming, we're disbanding, we're not fighting Turkey anymore. And what happens in the midst of all this? The Syrian Democratic Forces, which is another Kurdish paramilitary organization that has been an enemy of Turkey in Syria, decides we're done, we're disbanding, and we're just going to integrate ourselves into the Syrian armed forces. Why is this such a big deal? I'll tell you why. For one, this is a 4+ decades long conflict that's all of a sudden coming to an end. And it's coming to an end in the middle of the United States wanting to withdraw soldiers from Syria. And why were those soldiers in Syria? Why are there American soldiers in Syria to begin with? The reason why U.S. troops were deployed to Syria was to help the Kurds, to help the SDF fight against ISIS. Well, now the SDF has said, okay, we're going to become a part of the Syrian military. In other words, there's going to be no SDF anymore. And the SDF did this not too long after the leader of the PKK told his followers from prison to end their war against the Turkish government. So the PKK says, we're done fighting. And then not too long after that, the SDF says, we're going to become a part of the Syrian military. Those two events are not disconnected. And this is not coincidental at all. The PKK and the SDF are connected. They're essentially the same movement. So the PKK says, we're done. The SDF now says, we're done. Now the Turks are telling the Americans, you see, the Kurdish fighters are dropping their weapons or they are integrating themselves into the Syrian military. So America, you don't need to be in Syria anymore, because the whole purpose of America's military presence in Syria was to help the Kurds. Well, the Kurds are saying we're done. And now Turkey has the green light to tell the Americans, you guys don't need to be in Syria anymore. We will take over Syria. And this gives the opportunity that Trump has been waiting for. Because going all the way back to Trump's first term, Trump has been wanting to withdraw the soldiers from Syria. And Trump congratulating Erdogan, saying congratulations for taking over Syria. Trump saying that the key to Syria is Turkey. Trump saying that I want to withdraw all the troops out of Syria are all interconnected events. And now Turkey is saying, America, you don't have to be in Syria. We will take care of it. And that's exactly what Donald Trump wants to hear. And Israel is expressing outrage. They're remonstrancing. They're complaining about it. And what is America doing? America is looking at Israel with a smirk, the same smirk that was on Netanyahu's face when he was in that meeting with Donald Trump. And America is giving Israel a big, fat middle finger. Because Donald Trump knows that Erdogan hates Israel. Everyone knows this. And we all know, the whole world heard Erdogan say, "Oh Allah, may you destroy the state of Israel." And America doesn't give a shit. Where was all that talk about protecting Israel and, all that talk that they utilized against Iran when they said, oh, Iran, they want to destroy Israel. This is so terrible. So that's why we have to stand up against Iran. Where is all that same talk when it comes to Turkey? It's not there. Ooh, I wonder why. Because it's not about principles. It's not about morals. It's not about preventing genocide. Genocide is the last thing on the minds of nations. The first thing on the minds of nations is geopolitical advantageousness. That is what is pursued more than anything else. Genocide is only talked about if there is a benefit to talking about it. Just like it was beneficial for the United States to talk about Iran's aspirations to destroy Israel. They're not saying this in regards to Turkey's aspirations to destroy Israel, because they don't give a shit. In Trump's Middle East, Israel's standing has been downgraded. This is what I was saying earlier. Israel's standing has been downgraded. From the arms deals with the Gulf states to the embracing the Syrian president and a proposed agreement over Gaza, Trump's visit to Middle East marks a turning point in the region, and Israel remains on the sidelines for the time being. These are dramatic days in the Middle East, both in terms of the development and the pace at which they are being made known. The region appears to be experiencing the most far-reaching changes since the 2003 Iraq War. Yes, this is very, very true. Yes, so the Iraq War, you see, when the Americans wanted to do the Iraq War, they presented a plan. They presented a plan in which they expressed their vision for the Middle East. And they said, oh, this is going to be a new Middle East. It's going to be a transformed Middle East because it will be a Middle East that will have democracy. And so the U.S. invaded Iraq. We all know the story. Chaos ensued, and chaos has been ensuing ever since. Iran rose up. Turkey rose up. Syria went into absolute chaos. We're seeing Turkey rising up even more with the fact that it's taking over Syria. Israel has troops in Syria, and Israel had a war with Hezbollah. Israel is in a war with Hamas, and these are proxies of Iran. And Iran rose up as a response to what? As a response to Saddam Hussein being taken out. So most of the problems that we see in the Middle East can somehow or another, in one way or another, be traced back to the Iraq War. When 9/11 happened and those planes hit the towers, that was the beginning of the formation, or that was the beginning of the origin story of the world that we live in right now. And the fact is that 9/11 happened in 2001. That was the beginning of a new decade. And what happens at the beginning of every decade? Something crazy happens that marks a violent shift towards a new world, for lack of better words. 2020 began with COVID, and that marked the beginning of a transition. 2010 marked a new world, marked a dramatic change in the world. We had the economic crisis in Europe, and that led to the beginning of the revival of nationalism in Europe. So it's just the beginning of every decade is the beginning of a new change in the world. So 2020 happens. COVID was the new beginning. It was the start of this new change. And now we're seeing the United States sidelining Israel, getting closer with the Gulf Arab countries, getting closer with Turkey, enabling Turkey to expand its territory. It is a very, very new transition. It's a very surreal transition. So this author is correct when he says this. The United States is reestablishing its network of alliances amid an attempt to resolve some of the old disputes. The regional policy that Donald Trump is spearheading reflects a business thrust that is brutal and arrogant, but not gung-ho for wars. So we're seeing the United States doing all these deals with these Gulf Arab countries, doing these deals with Turkey, and they're aggressive. They're very proactive, but they are not enthusiastic, or they're not being done for the purposes of pursuing war. The president seems to be growing enamored of the peacemaker image that he has adopted in the Middle East and in other arenas. And this is the personage that Trump wants to exude. He wants to exude this image of the peacemaker. So that's why when Israel was going to Trump saying, hey, let's have a war with Iran, Trump told the Israelis, you're not going to be dragging us into a war. At the moment, Israel's part in the events is negligible. Trump is offering a solution, albeit superficial and full of holes, that could help bring about an end to the war in Gaza. Benjamin Netanyahu is in no rush to buy it. As in all his years in power, he's fearful of a settlement being imposed on him. But there are other dangers, that the Americans will leave Israel to its own devices or that Netanyahu will try to scuttle an agreement using force in Gaza and even in Iran. So the author is making an interesting observation. He is saying that the United States could just leave Israel to deal with its own problems. And the thing is that the way that America is treating Israel, it's kind of like how America has been dealing with Europe. America has been sidelining Israel, sort of like how American politicians have been telling the Europeans, you guys need to deal with your own damn problems. And what has been the reaction in Europe? The reaction has been the Germans saying, we're going to make the biggest military in all of Europe. We're essentially going to bring back the Reich. We're going to bring the Fourth Reich into existence. So if America continues doing this sort of policy of sidelining Israel, or maybe telling Israel that they need to deal with their own problems, you will see Israel saying, okay, we're going to deal with our own problems, and you, America, are not going to get involved. And if Israel starts to do that, Israel will become even more brutal than it is right now. And every time I say this, you have these types of people, you have these anti-Zionist types who are super critical of Israel to the point that you can't have a conversation with them unless you agree with them on every single point. And if I say Israel is going to become even worse, you have people who say, "What do you mean? Look at Gaza." Everyone knows what's happening in Gaza. I'm saying it's going to be worse than what's happening in Gaza. It's going to be worse because at least with Gaza, yes, it's bad. Don't get me wrong. But you still have the majority of Gazans being alive. I'm talking about a final solution policy that will be done and conducted by Israel. So if America says, okay, Israel, we're going to leave you to your own devices, expect Israel to become full-blown genocidal and expect Israel just to take off the mask. And all that Hosperist bullshit of, oh, we're the friendliest people in the Middle East, all that shit's going out the window. That's my prediction. So it says here, almost 4 months into his term, Trump has signaled a turning point in his visit to Persian Gulf states this week. He set in motion contracts with a combined value exceeding $1 trillion. So the Gulf Arab countries want to invest over $1 trillion in the U.S. economy. America's not going to say no to this. The president's remarks during the visit expressed an American readiness to reconsider the supply of F-35 stealth fighter jets to Turkey and Saudi Arabia. Again, America is doing the opposite of what Israel wants. For more than 5 decades, preserving Israel's qualitative military edge was a cornerstone of relations with the United States. No ranking Israeli official will dare say so publicly, but the thought that regional powers that are not especially friendly to Israel will acquire the acme of American aerial technology sends shudders down the spines of many of the professionals here, meaning in Israel. So for 50 years, the policy has been that Israel must have the military edge in the Middle East. Well, if the United States starts selling F-35s to Turkey, that'll create a shift in the balance of power in the Middle East, so to speak. And the Turks will have an advantage over the Israelis. Again, if America starts selling F-35s to Turkey, that'll be yet another sign that in the future, America is just going to throw Israel under the bus. It says here, let me see, make this a little bit bigger here. Hamas figures stated in interviews with the New York Times and with The Guardian that the desire to disrupt the Saudi agreement and to return the Israeli-Palestinian conflict to the top of the agenda in the Middle East was among its major considerations in launching the attack. So Hamas is saying the reason why we did October the 7th was to basically hinder the whole process of normalization between the Saudis and Israel. And the reason why was because Saudi Arabia was not really paying regard to the Palestinian issue when they were talking about normalizing relations with Israel. If you guys remember, during that time when Donald Trump was president during his first term, the Palestinians were very upset at the Saudis because the Saudis were talking about normalizing relations with Israel, and they really weren't giving the attention, or they weren't really giving serious attention to the Palestinian issue. So the Palestinians did an attack. And the purpose of the attack was to spark a provocation from Israel to get the Israelis to bomb Gaza, so much so to the point that the Arabs, the Gulf Arabs, would have no choice but to say, we're not going to normalize relations unless you stop the killing in Gaza and the U.S. recognizes a Palestinian state. Now, are the Americans going to recognize a Palestinian state? It would be very bold of me to make such a prediction, so I will leave that to the truth of the future. So my guess is that the war is going to continue on. until Israel takes enough territory so that it'll say, we have enough territory to build settlements. And then it'll pursue a ceasefire. And part of the ceasefire deal will be that Israel will be allowed to control at least a chunk of Gaza, probably half of Gaza. And the United States will say yes in the name of regional stability. The United States will say yes. And the settlers will be entering Gaza, and the bloodshed and the killing and the chaos will eventually resume. So it says here that the U.S. hinted to the mediators and through them to Hamas that they hope that by then Netanyahu will be inextricably corralled and will thus enter the chute leading to the completion of the deal without being able to reverse course and resume fighting. So the Americans do want a ceasefire. They do. But Israel doesn't want to do the ceasefire until they get something out of this war. And that is going to be territory. So it says here, according to Arab and American sources, a deal of this kind will include the entry into Gaza. Now, this is very interesting. According to Arab and American sources, a deal of this kind will include the entry into Gaza of a multinational force with a symbolic official role being assigned to the Palestinian Authority. Who is going to lead this multinational force? That's my question. Who's going to lead the multinational force? Saudis? Americans? I'm guessing Americans will be there because America's running this whole thing. So I could see Americans. I can see Saudis. Could you guys imagine? Turkish troops in Gaza? Could you imagine that? Turkish soldiers in Gaza? And let's say that Turkish troops will be in Gaza, right? And then one day, one of these Turkish troops gets attacked. Bam. You could start a conflict right there between Israel and Turkey. Or could you guys imagine German soldiers in Gaza? German soldiers in Gaza policing the Jews. That'll be surreal, just given the history. That would be surreal. That'll be insane. Leaks and hints are coming out of Washington about rising tension between Trump and Netanyahu. The ouster of the National Security Advisor, Michael Waltz, snapped Netanyahu's key channel of communication with the administration, which was managed by Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer. The Washington Post claimed that Trump booted Waltz out of the White House and into the United Nations when he found out that Netanyahu was running him on the Iranian issue. And it's very interesting what it says here. This is all very, very interesting stuff. Michael Waltz, according to this article, was Netanyahu's key conduit by which to communicate his demands to the Trump administration. Do you see what I'm saying? And Trump cut that channel off. He cut that communication line off from the Israelis. So the Americans really don't like the Israelis. In fact, there is an interesting video that you can watch. There is a guy by the name of John Kiriakou, I think his name is. He is a Greek American individual. John Kiriakou. He is a Greek American individual who was a member of the CIA. And he talked about what it was like working with the Israelis. And he says that the CIA does not trust the Israelis. And he gives a number of stories in this talk that are very disturbing, to say the least, I will say. So, for example, he said that there was a couple, a husband and wife, who were working for American intelligence, and they were living in Israel. And they had this apartment somewhere in Israel. I think it was in either Jerusalem or Tel Aviv. I don't remember. But they had this apartment, or they had this home in Israel. And one day, they go out somewhere, and they come back to their house, and all of a sudden, all the furniture is rearranged. And they're wondering, who the hell rearranged all the furniture? It was the Mossad. The Mossad came into their house while they were gone and just rearranged everything. And it was a psychological attack on these intelligence agents to let the Americans know we are in charge, and we're so damn good at ending people, that we could just enter your house anytime we want. And in fact, we can just rearrange all your furniture. So it was a form of psychological intimidation. So then one day, this couple leaves somewhere. They go shopping, wherever. They come back home and they find shit, human shit, in every toilet in the house. Yeah. And they're thinking, people broke into our home and just shat in every single toilet. Who was it? Mossad agents. Mossad agents came in and they took dumps in all the toilets in the house, just to let them know we're so much in charge here that we can just willingly enter your home and just shit in your house. So then one day they go to some Christmas party. This couple, husband and wife, they go to some Christmas party or some event. They come back home in the evening and they find their dog with its tail sewn back onto his body. So somebody chopped the dog's tail off and then sewed it back on. And they're thinking, what psychopaths did this? Mossad agents. They went into the home, they cut the dog's tail off, and then they sewed it back on, just to let them know that we could just end people. And we're so good at it that we can just come into your house, we can take a shit, we can chop your dog's tail off, it doesn't matter. So chopping the dog's tail off was the straw that broke the camel's back, and this couple went to their boss and they said, you got to put a stop to this. And the CIA told the Israelis, don't do this bullshit again. And they stopped. They stopped harassing that couple. So it's stuff like that that leads CIA operatives to really not trust the Israelis and to really not like working with the Israelis. John Kiriakou also says that no CIA agent ever worked in the Gulf countries and came back disappointed. He said that CIA agents love working in the Gulf countries. They're easier to work with. But where they dread to work in is Israel. That's where they dread to work at, because they know they're going to be dealing with that type of psychological torture and stuff of that nature. So Donald Trump is sick of working with them. Donald Trump is sick of working with them. And he's so sick of working with them that he said, you guys aren't going to drag us into a war. Oh, and by the way, Mr. Waltz, you went behind my back and you spoke with Netanyahu about planning a coordinated attack on Iran, you're fired. So it says here, in Trump's first term, the prime minister's followers boasted about... Now check this out. This is what I think really pissed off Donald Trump. In Trump's first term, the prime minister's followers boasted about the degree of his influence on the U.S. president. And there was an Israeli commentator who is supposedly close to the Israeli government, and he said, what is being said in the Israeli government is that Donald Trump believes that the Israelis are trying to manipulate him, and he doesn't like that. And you know what? If this is the case, Donald Trump is correct. Because freaking Netanyahu said during Trump's first term, I got this guy in the palm of my hand. I got this guy in my pocket. So Donald Trump is showing Netanyahu that he's not going to manipulate him. He's not going to influence him. Now it appears as though Israel has lost much of that ability and, for the present, is watching the development as no more than an observer. In these circumstances, Netanyahu might go for a partial deal in the hope that ministers Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich will not abandon the coalition as long as he will find the way back to the war down the line. And that makes sense because the Likud party thrives on war. They need it to stay in power and to get votes. So Netanyahu could agree to a ceasefire, but he will agree to a ceasefire with already in his mind a way to end it.